TEP, which is peace in the old Comedian language. I'm Mark Harris, your host at DiversiTV. DiversiTV is a weekly interview show broadcast live and re-recorded and rebroadcast from the Lane Community College campus. If you're new to DiversiTV, welcome. If you're part of our growing legion of fans, welcome back. DiversiTV roughly looks at issues of diversity along the LCC rubric, which means we can talk about nearly anything and everything, and tonight is no exception. Our mission, and we choose to accept it, is to illuminate everyday diversity issues and give the mic and the camera to those who don't always get it. And we don't necessarily shy away from the uncomfortable subjects. We try and get real because that's the way our folks roll. Tonight we will be looking at this season, which roughly corresponds, this is our season 10, and we roughly correspond our seasons to LCC terms, so we've been doing this for 10 seasons, so nearly 4 years. We've got about 75 shows in the can, as they say, and tonight we'll be looking at homophobia in the black community. Originally this was going to be a panel, but the con side kind of got, I guess, not a consciousness deficit, but a courage deficit, and felt, I don't know, for whatever reason, so that's okay. Can you go to slide for a second? So I want to do some setup. So, human sexual diversity. So whether it's in concepts of gender, whether you think there's two genders, male and female, or male, female, mixed, or 7 genders or more, basically, or an acceptance of social acceptance and social incorporation of varied gender expression. So what kind of expression does your gender take? It has been an accepted fact of human life for easily 6 times as long as the less than 1,000 years of contemporary Western civilization. So I'm basically basing that from the fall of Rome, the Dark Ages, and Western civilization's rise again. Because under the Romans and the Greeks, there was a acceptance of sexual diversity that was incorporated within the culture as far as we're concerned. So it's only since we've experienced the less than 1,000 years of Western civilization that forms our current cultural context, which forces us to speak this particular language and read in this particular dialect. Remy Calalang, who's a multicultural director of Bethel School District, and I came up with a construct we called CRASH, which in its simplest form, classism, racism, addiction, ability, age, sexism, and heterosexism, which is what that category, what that acronym stands for. What a universal practice is, CRASH, that acronym basically speaks to systems of discrimination. So to counter systems of discrimination, we have what we call universal practices, which are essentially just like universal precautions with bloodborne pathogens. You assume that everybody's infected, and you protect yourself. So the universal practices are means of thinking around systems of discrimination. So, for example, with a language around heterosexism, heteronormative, homophobia, that's one way of understanding, okay, there is a fear of, particular gender, sexual orientation, etc. The American Psychological Association in 1973, with its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, basically stopped defining homosexuality as a mental illness. Now, vestiges of this belief before 1973 still exist within DSM with their concept of gender identity dysphoria, which even though they're not defining it as a mental illness, you will notice that it comes right after pedophilia, so that kind of juxtaposition makes it somewhat problematic because it doesn't define what a healthy sexuality is. It basically says that you have emotional problems based on discrimination and that we can charge insurance for it, but it doesn't say what health is. So, gender identity dysphoria. The World Health Organization followed suit from the global perspective in 1987. And so then we had various forms of terminology. So, for example, the intersex, which is a anthropological term that basically is 3% of human births, about 4 million people a year. So this is like the genetic code, where at one, just to conceptualize it, at one end of a continuum, you could have individuals who are born with completely visible and functioning 2 sets of visible genitalia that are functioning. So both a penis, vagina, a set of uterus, and a testes, and various gradations in between to what people consider quote unquote normal. But intersex folks are about 3% of human births, so about 4 million a year. So assuming that's been going on since this form of Homo sapiens has been going on, so nearly 250,000 years, various other cultures would have incorporated that into that reality into their social structure. So today, when we talk about gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning, two-spirit, etc., and within the black community, SGL, same gender loving, as one of the many terms. In Native communities, we talk about two-spirit people, which for example, among the Osage, 7 genders, 5 of which, only 2 of which we would recognize as heterosexual, the other 5 being gender expressions that are incorporated within the culture and were actively done so before contact and still exist in some form today. In Africa, an anthropologist recorded 12 kinds of marriage among the Dahomey in the 1970s. This was recorded by the black lesbian feminist poet, the late Audre Lorde. And then we look at issues of intersectionality, which includes skin privilege, socioeconomic privilege, sexual orientation privilege, and the intersection of other isms that we have within the crash model. So you could have, for example, with white privilege, within an organization, are white gays and lesbians accepted and elevated to positions of power over gays and lesbians of color? Are they or are they not? Can we, talk about that, how that happens? Do they become gatekeepers, etc.? Sexual diversity in Turtle Island, that is the continents of North, Central, and South America, in case you don't know what Turtle Island is. So, for example, anthropologists have noted in 117 Native American languages there's a word for a third gender. The anthropological term is burdash, which is an Arab word for specifically a male sex slave. Generically translated into English as two spirits, the reference is to a sacred condition where spirit, i.e. creator, which is beyond gender, infuses 2 spirits, male and female, within one body, and then there are varied gender expressions. So, for example, the Osage 7 genders. Female, hetero, wako, male, hetero, mika, male body, female spirit, winte, male body, female spirit, wingshe, and these persons can participate in women's secret societies. Number 5, joshi, female body, male spirit. This person can participate in the male secret societies. Joshe, female body, male spirit. And wakandiji, a person of mystery, can be either body and beyond the previous concepts. So basically within that gender expression, you have multiple ways of being. So from Audre Lorde's book, giving an example of sexual diversity in Africa, a 92-year-old Efik Ibibio woman of Nigeria recalls her love for another woman. I had a woman friend to whom I revealed my secrets. She was very fond of keeping secrets to herself. We acted as husband and wife. We always moved hand in glove, and my husband and hers knew about our relationship. The villagers nicknamed us twin sisters. When I was out of gear with my husband, she would be the one to restore peace. I often sent my children to go and work for her in return for her kindnesses to me. My husband, being more fortunate to get more pieces of land than her husband, allowed some to her, even though she was not my co-wife. All right? So basically talking about flexibility of roles within a village context within 20th century Africa. In the west coast of Dahomey, west coast of Africa, the Fon of Dahomey still have 12 different kinds of marriage. One of them is known as giving, quote, giving the goat to the buck, where a woman of independent means marries another woman who then may or may not bear children, all of whom belong to the bloodline of the first woman. Some marriages of this kind are arranged to provide the heirs for women of means who wish to remain, quote unquote, free, and some are lesbian relationships. Marriages like this occur throughout Africa in several different places among different peoples. Routinely, the women involved are accepted members of their communities, evaluated not by their sexuality, but by their respective places within the community. So these are basically taking place in African nations where there has been a more or less continuous cultural construct happening even during conquest by Western civilization. So from Africa to America. So sexual diversity, in other words, was incorporated into daily social and political life, or suppressed under the influence of weaponized forms of religion, notably the Abrahamic religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. In chattel slavery, this form of slavery that we know here in America, sexual diversity was suppressed in favor of survival. You didn't necessarily have open expressions of sexuality because your sexuality was controlled by massa. So it didn't matter if you were a lesbian woman and a slave, you could still be subject to rape and still expected to bear massa's children or whatever. So, though in resistance to slavery, gender expression was allowed to vary in favor of liberation. So Cathay Williams, who was a woman who dressed as a male soldier and fought in the Union Army, black women, in all male regiments. So, and this was discovered later, but during the war she dressed as a man. Harriet Tubman, the general, who was leading combat troops into battle. Sojourner Truth, where that famous speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" Well, basically, when she gave that speech, it was white women who made her take off her shirt to make sure that she had breasts, because it wasn't expected that black women could speak. And so part of that speech was saying, yes, I'm a woman, just because I'm outspoken, like a man. No, that's how we black people roll. That's how we roll. So with urbanization, then, you begin to see gay and lesbian expressions in the expressive arts, mostly acting, blues, writing, poetry, the Harlem Renaissance, the 1940s, 60s and 70s, and to the present day, health activism with STDs and poverty and racism, etc. So the show, again, was originally slated to be a pro-con panel, but most of the con kind of experienced cold feet, and we'll kind of chop up, well, what the opposition is, because it would have been an interesting show.
Great discussion.
Our guest tonight, Ms. Azariyah Victoria I. Rockstar Hilton, who is the current Lane Community College BSU president, and April K. Williams, a student ally. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, definitely.
So excuse that long setup, but we had to kind of like set the stage. So I think part of where the cold feet would come in is, in evidence, in the interest of full disclosure, those of you who have seen this show, look, my values are, I'm a drug counselor. So, and being a cultural nationalist and Afrocentric cultural nationalist, when I hear some members of the black community saying, about this panel, you're going to have the gay side and then the real black community, like, wait, like the real black community is not gay and lesbian, like I'd like you to say that to Angela Davis' face.
Right.
You black Republican. Who's authentic black?
Right. Exactly.
Okay, but, you know, I mean, not to say that, you know, members of the black community who are Republicans are not black, but who's led the liberation struggle? The last black Republican that I trusted with the liberation of our community is like Frederick Douglass.
Right.
Back in the day when there was a radical Republican Party, and what made the radical Republicans radical is they didn't believe in white supremacy. And they believed that the only solution to slavery is freeing the slaves, giving them the vote, 40 acres and a mule,
That's right.
and making them full American citizens with no restrictions. That
right.
was radical. All right? So when we're talking about American citizens not being allowed to marry, et cetera, I come down on the side of, by what right do you have to deny somebody access? Well, but yeah. So I clearly I have a certain bias. That's, you know, I admit it. So I guess that would be intimidating to some of those on the con side. So let's start with the questions. Where are you from?
I'm Ms. Azariyah. I've traveled all my life: Oregon, Washington, California, Ohio, and Germany. I'm a military kid, so spent a lot of time traveling. So I landed here in Eugene, Oregon.
Okay. Ms. Williams?
Yes, so I'm April Kay, and I'm actually originally from Southern California. I was born there, raised there, and through my mother I have citizenship in Canada, and I've spent some years there, so I've had like different cultural experiences from coming from the West Coast and having a very dominated gay culture, and then going to Canada, and it was accepting, but it definitely was not the same culture. And then coming to Eugene and not even having a gay bar in the city is very shocking to me, and I've only been here for 2 years now.
Well, there used to be gay bars back in the day.
I've heard the stories,
Yeah.
but
We've heard the
today
stories.
Yeah.
We have
there aren't
one, but
any.
it's so small, it's the size of the stage.
Yeah. What are you talking about?
Snafu.
Snafu.
It was about
right.
this big.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
well, how do you find the experience of living in Eugene as a black person?
You go first, boo. You'll love it.
Well, coming from California, I was definitely never the only person of color ever around, and I always grew up with people of color and always had like that community there. Coming to
A physical
Oregon,
community.
yes, a real,
right.
tangible, these
Right.
are other people that look and speak just like me.
And they live in the same place,
Yes.
and yeah.
Coming up to Oregon, it was very different. I'd been looked at like as an expert of the community, or
Right.
as someone to turn to when something happens in the black community, and I had never really experienced that before, because it was all of our struggle rather than me personally. You're the one who's different. Tell me what's going on with
You're
you
the
people,
spokesperson.
basically. Yes.
The Negro welcome wagon, as it were. Yeah.
And at first, like, I didn't know how to address it, because I had never really experienced this kind of like ignorance and like racism as I view it. So I got very defensive and shut down in most cases. But once I learned that if I frame it from my perspective and let them know how harsh that they're being with their words and their choosing speech, and they're actually coming across as very hostile rather than very like wanting to know what's actually going on in a community that's different from theirs. And especially with all the shootings that are going on in Portland, like I know everything, and I'm on top of all of my
And you've
stuff.
been here for 2 years.
For 2 years,
And that's long enough to know everything. Well, give another example of that hostility, because I'm not sure that people will get that.
Well, I used to work on the student government here, and every Wednesday we're supposed to have like this training about something we can take back to the campus, and we had a project where we were identifying words. So on one side it'll say somebody of European descent who is privileged by unknown forces and unknown power. And on the other side, that would be white, is the card. And person of color came up as one of the words, and the definition was an umbrella term for people of color, actually it didn't say people of color because you're supposed to find that word, but basically a collection of communities that are considered minority, but they are actually the dominant, and if you're looking at the whole world.
Planet, yeah.
So a discussion was brought up on why white was European descent and benefiting from privilege, and people of color was an umbrella term for a dominant side of the society in the large scale. And a woman there was saying, well, you know, I don't really agree with that. I don't consider myself white. And if we're talking about the black community, if those blacks just got educated, they'd be out of poverty, they'd be out of the ghettos, and everything would be okay. And I really had to grapple with that and say, well, actually, there's all these systems in place where even if you are doing everything you're supposed to be doing, there's not really much hope for you.
It's that way.
As if Strivers Row, well, they don't know what Strivers Row is, but a section of middle class, upper middle class, Harlem. So, right, you're not allowed to move to the Upper West Side unless you're like making millions. Mm-hmm. And so Strivers Row are those who were upwardly mobile, but yeah, they don't necessarily know about that here because a black community was not allowed to form here. Yes.
And I learned about that through like the activism work through the past year and really looking at Oregon's laws and it literally saying like no person of color or anyone besides white people can live here, and the black codes and like the redlining for the housing, and there's a lot of history here that most people who spent their entire lives have no idea about, and that really scares me.
I guess for me, tokenization is the key word that I see a lot here. Is they expect one person to speak for the entire community. And the realization is that as African Americans in a less diverse area, we don't all share the same experience. Because a lot of us either migrate here for college, or there's maybe two prominent families that have history back to 10th City, back to like the original families that traveled here first. The rest of us are here just migrating for school or leaving. Most of us are not setting up camp here. So we can't speak on the behalf of the entire black community because we all have different experiences from different parts of the country. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you want me or Miss K here to stand up and say, wow, this is the black experience. Can you speak on behalf of your own community in a classroom setting, or for a project, or to be the spokesperson, regardless of my status in the Black Student Union? It's an unrealistic expectation. Yet they seem to find
on one level,
yeah. But as a president, I understand where they're coming from, where they would want me to speak as a voice, and I say, I have to say this is my personal opinion. I don't speak on behalf of the BSU, but this has been my experience. Mm-hmm. Now, when it is my time to speak on the behalf of the BSU, I'll speak for BSU. Mm-hmm. But we all have our own individual experiences, which dictate how we feel and what we see in the world around us here in Eugene. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me as if the lack of diversity, it causes hostility and tension in a lot of places because they don't understand. They don't understand a lot of the slang and the vernacular. They don't understand the way we hold ourselves. They don't understand why we can give a head nod, and that can be a whole conversation. We walk down the street, they see one across the street, one across the other, and they think we're going to break into the car, so they lock their doors, or they grab their kids, or they put off the little signals while you're in the store that somebody's in this section of the store.
Or try to fade into the wall in the elevator.
Like, really? Really? We're human beings. We can't speak for each other, but you have to get to know us on an individual basis.
Mm-hmm. Well, part of that spokespersonship.
Oh, Lord.
Well, I guess you are expected to know something, right? But, right, you can't necessarily speak for everybody or be, an elected or unelected representative of the community.
Right.
But I think a position you can take is if you have some idea of what has been done traditionally, to the degree that there is a mainstream, you can...
Historically speaking.
Historically speaking,
you can.
So how do you find yourself relating to the larger community as a whole? So both outside of Eugene, because, I've personally have grappled with that question because I'm not from here. And, I very clearly identify as, no, I'm definitely not from here. This is not my home. I'm just a homeowner in this place.
Right.
Okay? And I've been here for 25 years, right? So that's long enough to say, okay, I'm not a transient, right? I have gotten some notoriety, some prominence, but, I'm not going to say that I'm one of, the spokespeople for, the black community, even though we have this joking term among some of us. We're the A-list minorities, right? We're the ones who work at institutions that get called by other institutions to speak on behalf of y'all, to make sure you get input so that the police department or the fire department, or the city, or, this hiring committee, or that, is doing the right thing. So they've checked the diversity, good deeds box. Right, they've checked the box, right? Now, however real that is, that doesn't necessarily deal with the grassroots. So I guess the part of the question is, one, okay, you're from other places that have had and have allowed to have intact black communities. So how do you relate to those larger communities? And then the black community as it exists in Eugene, which is a different proposition altogether.
I feel like I'm missing out on home. I miss it. It's funny, it's because there's something that happens when I see a lot of people of color here that migrate here, go to school here for a while. Either you meet up with people from out of state that are here and you make friendships, or you're pretty much, it seems to me like you're on your own. I feel like living here, I'm queer, so that adds another element to the whole black community, that I don't network with too many people. But when I leave Oregon, I went to Minnesota to see my son, and I was in the middle of the ghetto in St. Paul. I was around thugs, drug dealers, people that'll shoot you, kill you. I was around those crowds of people, and I was welcomed. I went there with my blonde hair down to my behind, and they received me welcomely. They said, this is family. They threw a party for me. But I came back here, and it was all of a sudden back to this hostile, like, where am I again? I don't feel safe anymore. I called my friends and said, you have to come and see me because I'm back in Eugene and I hate living here. I'm only here for school, and I'm done with school, I'm gone. I can't take it.
There's some people, of course, who would say, oh, good riddance. And there's some people that would also say, what a shame.
I'm here temporarily for school. To me, it is not a very welcoming environment. If you're lucky to find your place, you find good people that will support you and stand with you, then I call you blessed. But to be here in such a hostile place where you're not received for the ideas that you bring, for the cultural influence that you have, for the heritage and the legacy that you're in tune with or that you know about, and say, let's experience this, it's not received. They want the tokenized version. They want the watermelon jokes and the fried chicken and cornbread example they've seen stereotypically put on TV at movies. And when you don't bring that to the table, it's just like, oh, we have no use for you. Or please go play football or basketball. And I'm sorry, that's just not my image.
April, okay.
So back home, I definitely went to different schools, and I come from a lot of privilege, so I've never really caught on to the pattern of speech that most of my friends had back down at home. And I'd always experienced down in California.
Okay,
yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right.
And I've always experienced oh, you're such a great friend because I like the way you talk, or you act so white, and you're not like everybody else. And
they say that?
Yeah, they said that. So I didn't really mesh well with the larger black community down in Southern California, but the Latino population and the Asian American population, I definitely found home with them. And to me, there wasn't very many people from European descent, or at least that I saw, because I was more of a Britzy, not where I was from. And I've always found home with them, and being able to learn other languages and try other foods, and I've really enjoyed that because my family is just so bland and so plain and lacking a lot of culture. And then I come up to Eugene, and I've met Miss Azariyah, and I've met a few other people who I really feel like I can bond with, just on the simple fact that we can't seem to understand what's going on here with everybody else. And this, like, why are we always underneath the microscope, and why are people holding their purses? And a few of us went over to DC, and a friend of ours who's very large, very well built, was actually told that this person doesn't have any change and they should go away, when really he was just trying to figure out which monument was the one with the reflecting faces. I think it's the Korean Memorial, right? Correct?
Oh, Vietnam Memorial.
The Vietnam Memorial,
yeah, right.
And yeah, just assumptions that are placed onto you. But I definitely feel like I fit in better because we do come from all different types of walks of life and like different privileges, and not all of us are talking in slang all the time, and some of us talk like we've been stuck in a book for our entire lives. So yeah, I definitely, it's a different experience, but it's better up here.
If you were stuck in a book, what book would that be?
I don't know. It'd probably be something about a utopia or a good acid trip. I don't know.
Acid trip.
Right.
When did you first become aware of the reality of sexual diversity?
I don't really know. It just kind of evolved for me. I didn't grow up around a lot of gays, lesbians, transgenders that I knew of, and it wasn't until about a year ago that I realized my first babysitter was a lesbian. And when that light bulb a year or two went off, I was like, oh my God, that was a lesbian.
How did you know? How did you know? I mean, it's not like she was wearing rainbow.
No, she wasn't out like I'm out. I'm out. I'm just blow out. It was years of really realizing she's living with another woman. All their kids in the same space. They share the same room together. There's one bed. She played the stereotypical, what we call the stud role in the black community, which is the lesbian that's really butch and manly. And her woman was more femme, you know, larger, beautiful.
Bulldagger, I think is the term, yes.
So that's how I kind of realized, wow, it just years later, it just couldn't click. I was like, wow, I was around lesbians and didn't realize it. But I guess I realized sexual diversity is when I started experiencing my own sexual diversity and realized that I wasn't attracted to just one gender. I was attracted to a plethora of genders. When I realized I was attracted to, you know, quote unquote men or quote unquote women, I realized I was attracted to all people that fit down those scopes. And that's where I'd rather be, because that's what I felt was beautiful. And so as I traveled, the more I've traveled, the more I've run into people that I realized were a lot like me, who didn't just like one gender or two genders. They liked everybody. You know, some people that don't like stereotypical men, stereotypical women, that like trans people. You know, and that's when I started experiencing true sexual diversity, is when I stepped out of my religious box and stepped into a cultural box that was more welcoming, and I started to see people for who they were.
So that religious box, experiencing you during that phase is different.
Right.
So what do you mean by the religious box?
All my life I've been a Christian. I was a Christian, rather, and no disrespect to the community, but while I was trapped in that box, you know, I have my faith, so I still believe in my higher power. But growing up in that environment where it says you have to look a certain way, you have to talk a certain way, you have to believe a certain way, act a certain way, you know, got to look right, Sunday best, always have a great presentation, always expected to play certain roles in church. It was very rigid and very stiff and very depressing, because I found myself either trying to fix my sexuality because I could not find my faith matching up with what I felt inside of me. So I had to either suppress it. I went through counseling to try to change my sexual orientation. I went
to cure you?
To cure me. I went through different programs, and I came to the conclusion after, you know, being, you know, realizing I was bisexual by 9, and to about 22 is when I left the church, that it wasn't going to change. I just kind of felt like it's time to accept myself as I am and learn to love myself where I'm at, regardless if my sexual orientation changes or not.
Okay. April, okay. Same question.
I'd have to say it was when I moved to Canada and we were forced to take sex ed, and I assumed that it was going to be absence.
I wonder what Canadian sex ed is and how that's different from American sex ed.
It's
Or
very
same?
thorough. It's very amazing. It is very self-discovery based and really knowing what's going on with your body. I mean, I learned about a pap smear at this sex ed class when down in California or across the nation. I don't even think it's mentioned.
No, it is not.
And there was a lot of prevention, a lot of awareness, and literally going through
This
the
is
steps.
in school now.
This is in school, in
Public
high school.
school.
Yes.
In high school.
Yes.
What grade?
I was in the 11th grade.
Okay.
And we were
There's
able
some
to
policy implications out there, America.
Are they?
I think. I think.
Last I heard, it was still don't do it. It's no. We're going straight to
The
hell for
birds and the
that.
bees lecture.
I was really able to learn about like the processes behind sex and like the negative aspects of sex, like dealing with pregnancy or STDs or just the HPV that can lead to cancer, because one of the girls in school with us actually went through that process, and she was actually able to like give us her life experience of how going to checkups and like never knowing and like telling us to be assertive and like really know our doctors and like really taking that step to make sure that even though we are seeing this quote unquote expert, they're not actually an expert on our bodies. So yeah, that's definitely when my sexual diversity like flourished, and I was very curious, and yeah.
So, okay, so this is Canada, and they're talking, okay, so they're giving you, and I don't mean to put this down, but I mean, advanced plumbing lecture. So not only are they giving you the plumbing lecture, but they're also saying, this is how your body works, this is how you protect yourself. And it didn't say, I mean, because, you know, this is a term that I've heard thrown around, it doesn't sound like it was heteronormative.
No, it definitely was not. And there was places in there where we could talk about same-gendered couples and like just talk about like that kind of prevention and safety as well, and like issues that come up with that. And it was really beautiful to see, because coming from back home, like most of my friends did not come out until we were well out of high school.
Right.
And there were several people that I saw outed in front of a group of people, and there were other people I saw.
Not in a pretty way.
No, no, definitely not. And definitely saw people who were ostracized just because of who they wanted to love and just feeling so lost. And personally, I never really said anything about the subject, about me liking other women and finding them very attractive. And I honestly think it was because of the atmosphere that I was in, and I did not feel okay with it. And it wasn't actually until I was probably like 22 or something that I actually like tried something with a woman for the first time, even though I'd had those feelings for all those years. And I don't know, yeah, I had to come to terms with myself first.
What year were you in high school in Los Angeles?
It was it wasn't in Los Angeles,
Yeah,
it was an hour and away, but I was there from like my 9th and 10th grade year, and then I moved on to Canada and graduated from a high school there.
What year was that chronologically?
It's like 2000 to 2002,
Okay. All right.
I want to say.
There's a reason I asked.
Okay.
Okay. So 30 years before, I was part of a student activist movement, basically to, this was the era when, sex education was basically the plumbing lecture that you had gotten in middle school, film strips.
And afros in black and white.
Yeah. Right. I know. It's history for you. It's movies for you. I was there, right? So we were saying, okay, girls are getting pregnant. Obviously, your sex education isn't working. So what we need is free contraceptives passed out through the health office and a student-centered curriculum. Okay, we're asking the questions that our parents ain't answering for us, even when we ask them.
That's right. That's very bold.
Right. Okay. And that we want because our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters that because this is the beginning of the women's movement, early 70s, 2 years after Our Bodies Ourselves first got published. So this is West Coast, and we're adopting that, and we're part of men's and women's consciousness groups. Huey Newton had written in the Black Panther Party that gay liberation struggle is a revolutionary struggle, and there we were with our little red books and reading the Black Panther paper and passing out our own underground newspaper, and we were trying to get all this stuff through the schools in the era that Ronald Reagan was governor.
Wow.
Now, it was considered radical in 1971. When I came back to work in the schools in the 80s and then the 90s, they actually finally got those things were passed, at least the part about contraceptives passed out through the health office for AIDS prevention. I don't know about any of the other stuff. So 8 years later, here you are in 9th and 10th grade, and they're still not really doing anything, which seemed like a radical idea in the 70s, was actually just common sense. We're asking for it, and if we can form the question, you should be able to provide the answer if you're adults, whether or not you're ready to deal with it. But if they had done what we said in the 70s, they would have been ready for the AIDS onslaught in the 90s.
That's right. That's the truth.
So part of the fact that they institutionalized that in Canada, right, in terms of evidence-based, science-based curriculum. Look, let's just deal with this. This is an adult level in terms of looking at and I don't think that the data shows that teen pregnancy rates or STD rates are higher as a result of doing that in Canada. So
no, they're definitely not, because you're smart enough to know the consequences of your action before you're actually jumping into that step.
Right. So it's actually scientifically based prevention. So, all right. So moving on from that, because when we talk about then identifying yourself as whether it's SGL or whatever, whoever you decide that you're going to love, whatever that gender expression is, whether you identify with that community or as you're an ally with that community, what is your role modeling for that? Because, as an example, at least in Canada, they're giving you the information without necessarily trying to encourage you one way or the other, but you're going to be thinking about it. So what kind of role modeling are you getting?
Yeah, it definitely came through life experiences and making mistakes, and there was definitely no role model. It was hands-on experience, and I would say how I role model being an ally. Like an example comes from today. One of my housemates asked about another housemate's sexual preference, and I said, I honestly don't know. I've never asked them, and I will never ask them. Whenever they feel comfortable to tell me who they like to see and who they prefer, that's when I'll know. And until then, it's not my place to ask, and it's not my place to assume. And she sat back and was like, whoa, I didn't really think about that. I'm just needing to know and all these things about somebody's life that really doesn't pertain to me in any way. And it was just more of a curiosity than an actual validity for their friendship.
Yeah, how is it relevant if it isn't relevant to you? Unless you're asking personally because you want to get together with them or not. How is it relevant? It isn't, really. Not. But most people don't take that position, that point of view. When you look at how your identity was formed, what role models did you have, or do you have? Now, the reason I'm breaking this down, okay? You mentioned lack of a gay bar, right? And so I'm a substance abuse prevention person. So one of the things that a previous guest on the show, young black gay writer, that was the peg for the show, and he was breaking down the DSM gender identity dysphoria, and it was making him angry. And part of what it was making him angry is, okay, so great, you can charge insurance for the negative talk that society is imposing on you, but this does not tell you how to be a healthy black gay man.
Right. It doesn't teach that.
Yeah, it doesn't teach that at all. So, as far as, when I start talking about, okay, well, James Baldwin, Essex Hemphill. I start naming gay writers, black gay writers, and the stance that they take. I mean, he'd never heard of them, right? Or even Langston Hughes. What? Langston Hughes was gay and black? Like, how do you not know that? Oh, you must have gone to school in Eugene. I mean, really? I mean,
they ain't gonna teach you that in school here.
Well,
okay. Course, you're not gonna teach you.
Well, I mean, again, so yeah, how do you go through? I could name the high school, but there's no point. How do you go through? How do you learn about Langston Hughes and not learn about A, the Harlem Renaissance, B, that Harlem Renaissance means that Langston is black, or at least mixed race, black and Indian, and 3, gay. How do you not know that? Those are like kind of inseparable there, right? Because it's part of a historical era. So in any case, the role modeling, right? As a heterosexual, I mean, I'm not necessarily going to role model after my parents, because even the idea of my parents having sex is like, no, you don't do that. It's too much information.
Yeah, that's gross. Right.
So the piece about role modeling.
My role models, I don't really have. My role models always consist of people I've seen, characters in movies, history, people of that nature. But I guess my role model was actually a native brother by the name of Richard, and I think he was down in the southern part of America. I can't remember, it's either Arizona or Nevada. And they called him a Nutley in his tribe, which was a term for two-spirited. And when I saw the video on him, it's like people have been calling me two-spirited for about a year and a half before I even understood what it meant. And when I saw Richard and his mother say, Richard would wake up in the morning and say, who do I want to be today? He didn't want to wake up and say, I'm a boy today, or I'm a girl today, or I'm this. He would dress however he saw fit. If it was more femme, then he would be femme. If he felt more masculine, he dressed according to how he felt. And when I saw that, I kind of cried, and I was like, wow. Now I understand what they mean when they say I'm two-spirited. Now I understand. And as I began to study his life and I study the native side of my culture, I started to see what two-spirited people are. And we were highly respected, sought after people in the aspect that we took care of the kids. We were considered what I would call prophetic prophets. So the stargazers, we would look into the future. We were spiritual beings that were respected for. So when I look at people like Richard and many other two-spirited people, self-identified two-spirited, those are my role models. Because I'm not really seeing many in the modern media, at least how the media is portraying them, to be a role model for me.
I'm still stumped on the role model question, because
Next.
I don't know. I can remember when I started thinking of myself as possibly liking women, and I mean, I was in the 6th grade when that happened, and I definitely could not speak about it there because I didn't even know who I was at the time. But I don't know, I just knew that there was a part of me that I would never deny, and I would tell some people, not never tell people, maybe like my parents for one. And
Well, yeah. Right. But unless, and that's one of the things in terms of when we're talking about the homophobia piece. I mean, because when we look at that, how do you form notions of a positive identity when every role model has negative so to speak, has negative ideation about your particular characteristic, the social.
Right.
How do you do that?
How they always peg us as negative. There's something wrong with this.
Child molesters, or blah, blah.
That's the interesting, because I did the study, and I think it was a guy by the name of Daniel Moore, or it's either for him or Phillips Laley, and they were talking about how 1 in 4 gay black youth are going to commit suicide. And it's because the messages that are given to them, predominantly these are kids that grow up in church for the most part.
Right.
The message that is given to them that there's something wrong with you, you're a failure, you're screwed up in your head, you're evil, and you need help, or God doesn't love you. And so it's like, for me, I had to unlearn what I was taught about myself. I had to walk away from everything that I had ever believed in order to find who I really was. And as I began to search myself out and begin to challenge myself, I found out I'm not what you say that I am. I'm not saying I'm completely over it, but I know I'm not the image that the church has given to me.
Yeah.
I'm not a deviant. There is nothing wrong with me. I am normal. I am normal to who I am. I'm normal to my culture. I'm normal to my heritage and my lineage. There's nothing wrong with me. And as I began to step out and be me and be comfortable in my skin, I started seeing more people like me. And I started seeing more kids and teenagers that were like me. And I began to see that, wow, all across the world, and even in history, Africa, Asia, Europe, South America, there's people like me all across the globe, and there always has been.
4 million a year born for the last. So that's a significant point of the population. And I guess being heterosexual, being raised in that church, but I was raised in a church that...
Yeah.
Okay, well, Yeshua was black, right? And we had to worship, we were forced, this is how my grandfather put it, we were forced to worship a Bible that said we were cursed. Okay? That black people were cursed, and we were cursed by God, and that's why we were black. Right? And that's why, and the people that taught us that, that's why we had an image of a European Jesus. So it's like we're taught to hate ourselves, and that's why we were supposed to be, because of that curse, we were destined to be in slavery. So when I then hear black people then saying, what they say about gay people, I'm thinking, okay.
That's the same thing they're doing to you.
Yeah, right. But I was taught that Yeshua was black,
right,
and that, I needed to find the word in the original language, and Christianity was an African religion, not a Western religion. So, I had to think, opposite from what the dominant culture was doing already. And so when I started looking at, the origins of homophobia within the black community, I'm thinking, okay, there's a doublethink going on here.
I think it's funny because you can, and what really astounds me is the black community here in Eugene that I have dealt with. Now, I'm not speaking on every community. It's just certain aspects of the community I've dealt with here. It's how are you going to judge me because of my gender expression or my sexual orientation when the same criticism that you're throwing at me or Miss K here is the same criticism that has been in place over you? That same system of oppression that's come to destroy you, your kids, your mom, your dad, it's the same thing you're putting on me now. And it's like, don't you see the same struggle? Don't you see the same mindset that's been imposed on you about your blackness, about your Africanness? And you're imposing that same theology on me. It's the same bigotry.
It's the same. It's basically a theology based on self-hatred, which... Okay, where did that come from exactly?
Was spoon-fed through religion.
Well, that certainly wasn't in the original religion, because people do not create religions to hate themselves. They do not. No one does.
No one wants to hate themselves.
They don't. So where did that message come from?
I say Pastor Aaron at Crossfire.
Well, now.
I'm joking, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, it's not. Well, again, that's why I was talking about weaponized religion. So, they may think that I'm, cursed and going to hell and leading people astray. And I'm going, excuse me, where did you get this concept about... All right. When we talk about HIV, all right, so certainly as a BSU president, you're one of the first, or if not the first, to make an emphasis on HIV prevention among heterosexuals.
Yeah.
Now, having been here 18 years and witnessing 18 different BSU presidents, you're the first one that's done that.
Thank you.
Okay,
wow.
The first.
With
okay,
April
so
Gay.
Yeah, all right.
We work
props
together
all
on
around.
that.
So I'm just saying, look, in Africa, HIV is a heterosexually transmitted disease. That's a fact.
Right.
Okay, globally, it's a heterosexually transmitted disease. So folks who are saying, oh well, AIDS is God's punishment to gays. It's like, okay, so is God punishing black people? Because go ahead, justify that. Is that what you're saying? Well, and they kind of do a mental double take. So, when we look at, systems of self-hatred that have been, placed upon us and fighting back with like a counter narrative. Like, you know, like, okay, I'm going to wake up and who am I going to be today?
I love it.
I'm going to be a stargazer. I'm going to be a person that takes care of and nurtures and feeds children and hangs out with them and tells them stories and encourages their dreams. I mean, okay, so you have a special sacred role to do that, and that's who I'm going to be. But why can't any of us do that, no matter who we choose to take to our beds if we do?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, why? No,
I know, right? I laugh. I'm sorry I laugh so much, but it's because of what religion has taught us. And I'm sorry, I have to say it, just be blunt about it. As a person that's grown up in church, when I read this information,
And you love your Jesus.
I have not lost my faith at all. It's just changed.
Yeah, I never really had the faith and wasn't really raised in the church, but I have experienced the God side of the argument of, you know, you just kissing a person of the same sex means that you are guaranteed a spot in hell right there. Like, I never understood it because I flipped through the Bible and I don't see like the concrete proof that says if you are sleeping with the same sex, that's an automatic ticket to hell. Like, yeah. I don't know. And I think we were socialized to believe that and like took on our own beliefs from religion and are implementing them now because I couldn't tell you where this is coming from.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there because it's gone fast. So I want to thank you for coming.
Thank you for having us.
If you like what you've seen, email us at liveclass@lanecc.edu. Put DiversiTV in the subject line. Tell us what you thought of this show and other shows. And suggest future shows if you wish. Until then, go well, stay well. This has been DiversiTV.